Welcome to a new series. This will be called Gateway to the Holocaust. The purpose of this series is to share the basis of knowing for certain that a two-state dissolution will be imposed upon Israel within the next 12 months, between now and the 22nd of May, 2026, which is Shabuah and the beginning of the time of Jacob's troubles, therefore of great adversity for Israel. That at that time, we can be certain that Israel will be thinned at the waist, and that the United States will be the primary culprit causing this to happen, and that the result will be the deaths of millions of Jews and billions of people worldwide. This is a replay of what Neville Chamberlain did with Czechoslovakia to appease Adolf Hitler, and the consequence is going to be World War III. This time, Neville Chamberlain is Donald Trump. Czechoslovakia is Israel. Adolf Hitler is Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and the Nazis are Muslims. And so I want to share with you how I came to know what is going to transpire and why I have been so emphatic since Donald Trump won the last election that he was the next Neville Chamberlain, that he is the one who will undercut and betray Israel. And up to this point, even without the prophecy, every sign points in this direction, that Donald Trump has received $16 billion in bribes to do this very thing, and that he is going to abandon Israel when the call is from the rest of the world and by Saudi Arabia to establish a so-called Palestinian state. And as I begin this, I want you to know that not only does Wookiee agree here, and Wookiee, who was named after Chewbacca because he has a little bit of the Chewbacca attitude and appearance, wants to be known in this series as Koleb. Koleb means all heart. It is the name of the of the individual who was one of only two, along with Yahusha, which means Yahweh liberates and delivers, who was not afraid to Yahweh's words to where they lead, and when investigating the promised land, said, if Yahweh was for us, who can be against us? And so this is Junior Koleb right here. So I want you to know how I came to know that the two-state solution will be imposed, and how I came to know exactly when this was going to happen, and indeed who was going to perpetrate it. This reads, a prophetic pronouncement, a masa, a prophecy designed to encourage partiality by discriminating, a timely declaration regarding a future burden or hardship being removed and lifted away, such that it is carried out by Damascus, obviously the capital of Syria, the predicted epicenter of World War III. It is a word that is derived from Dama, a weeping sore, Dima, tears of sorrow, Domen, corpses covered in dung, and Damam, to grow dumb and be silenced. Every time that I see Damascus now, and we'll interrupt this just for the moment, I think of the utter immorality, stupidity, the disgusting and appalling nature of Donald Trump not only agreeing to meet with al-Jawlani, a former leader in al-Qaeda, who then migrated to the Islamic State when the Islamic State was more popular among Islamic jihadists, and then part of al-Nusra, which was a ruthless Islamic terrorist organization, and now to an Islamic terrorist organization armed and equipped by Turkey for the purpose of taking Syria back to fundamentalist Islam and therefore terrorist Islam. And he not only shook hands with him and decided that he was a attractive man, a fighter, a strong man, but he agreed to fund him, to support him. He's now even working with Turkey, who supplied the arms for his ability to subdue Syria. And then included him in the retrobates of the puny table. I don't know if you saw the subsequent meetings where Jelani was part of the group of Muslim despots meeting with Donald Trump to figure out how they would divvy up the world. It is particularly immoral and sad. Behold, Damascus, a capital of the most religiously ravaged and politically manipulated war zone on earth, is revolting, according to God, and it is corrupt. I would think Yahweh knows what he's talking about. Certainly that would be the conclusion any moral and rational person would derive. So Damascus is revolting, and it is corrupt, and it will be removed from among inhabited cities. Yes, there is nothing good that comes out of Damascus. Even Christianity was born in Damascus. It is a weeping sore, degenerate, unrestrained, and thus it's going to be rejected, abolished as a population center, the city being the source of anguishing asses in a town that is ultimately displeasing. This was presented in the hopeful stem, telling us that this fate will be foisted on Damascus, and as a participle, which means that Damascus will come to embody unrestrained corruption. God's pretty good with this prophecy stuff. She shall become a twisted and tangled heap of fallen buildings and rubble with great destruction. Yashayah, salvation is from Yahowah. Isaiah 17:1. Well, this is a bold and unequivocal statement because Damascus holds the distinction of being the longest continually inhabited city on earth. But soon that will not be the case. And it will be largely destroyed and depopulated. Now, in context, this prophecy is specific in time and place. It will be fulfilled on or before the 22nd of May, 2026, and the immediate period thereafter, which begins the time of Israel's troubles, and it's going to occur in and around Damascus, the capital of Syria. This is 7 years prior to Yahweh's return with the Messiah Dode. It is exacting in its depiction of what is to occur. The city is going to exhibit many buildings that are twisted and tangled, fallen as rubble. Even better, it is unambiguously presented and undeniably affirmed in the great Isaiah scroll, the Dead Sea manuscript found at Qumran in the 1950s and dating to 250 BCE. Therefore, when the city is rendered as this prophecy portends, and it is already that, it is despicable, it is grossly immoral, it's a den of thieves, which is, and then even pummeled more than it has already been by ongoing war, which is likely between now and 2027. Those who are aware of it and who are rational will form the irrefutable conclusion that this event was foretold and documented by God. He alone exists outside of the confines of time and can accurately reveal our future and our past long, long ago, 2,700 years ago in this case. And he, more than anyone, values his children's safety, and he wants us to be aware of what's going to occur. Now, based upon what God is about to share, Damascus is among the fulcrums upon which the future of human history will pivot, taking a decidedly dark, deceitful, and destructive, even deadly turn. We can set our prophetic clocks to this event, and that is amazing in and of itself, because Damascus represents the worst of the human experience. It epitomizes the way of man, the way of religion. And it is the place where worlds will collide. I can think of at least 6 reasons why Damascus must fall and why its demise is symbolic of our times. First, the Torah's initial reference to Damascus is in Bereshith, in the beginning, Genesis. Abraham's servant Eliezer, a child of Damascus, was the first person expressly forbidden the possibility of participation in the covenant. Yahweh said of his inclusion, absolutely and unequivocally no. Second, 2,000 years thereafter, the world's most pervasive plague, Pauline Christianity, was inspired on the road to Damascus when a religious Jew, a rabbi, Shaul, embraced the Roman Catholic moniker Paulos and conspired with Satan to nullify the covenant with Abraham. After leaving Damascus, Paul would devote his life to discrediting Yahweh's Torah testimony and obscuring the initial 3 mikra that Dode fulfilled, replacing it all with his anti-Semitic New Testament. Third, shortly after the Pauline debacle in 66 CE, his benefactor, Rome, baited and then belittled Judah. They incited the uprising that they subsequently squelched when the Roman overlord Jesus Florus plundered the temple treasury. Nero responded by dispatching Cestius Gallus from the Damascus region, along with the Damascus-based Legion 12, Fulminata. When Judean rebels annihilated the Syrian legion during the Battle of Beth Horon, killing 6,000 Syrian troops and confiscating the legion's Aquila, its eagle standard. Nero retaliated by dispatching his most experienced and ruthless general, Vespasian, and he invaded Galilee from Syria in 67 CE. Thereafter, when Nero committed suicide, Vespasian declared himself emperor of Rome. With Vespasian off to claim his prize, his son, Titus, was allowed to make a name for himself by pummeling and then plundering Yehudah, by sacking and looting Jerusalem. He would breach the city's walls in 70 CE after a brutal 7-month siege, setting the stage for one of the most insightful, albeit despicable, episodes in human history. The assets of the earth's most effective symbol of love and life were confiscated to fund the construction of mankind's most infamous shrine to hatred and death, the Roman Colosseum. Jewish men were hauled off as slaves and forced to build this deplorable edifice to Roman ideals that was funded by the booty stolen from Yahowah's temple. Fourth, as a further insult, Emperor Vespasian moved the capital of the Roman province of Judea to Damascus. This set the stage for Hadrian, who in 133 capitalized on what Paul had done to set up Rome to destroy what remained of Yehuda. He found no trouble in justifying the murder of countless Yehudim while enslaving the rest, thereby initiating the diaspora, all based upon Akiba's false Messiah Bar Kokhba. He transformed Jerusalem into a retreat for his legions, replete with shrines to himself, erasing the name Yehuda and replacing it with Philistia, Palestine. It is a blight that has been revisited to stricken the land. Fifth, the world's deadliest and most demonic religion, Islam, was unified, codified, and ruled from Damascus shortly after Muhammad's death. During this period, Muslims murdered nearly a third of the earth's population, and they plundered the known world, killing 200 million people and raping and enslaving that many more. And it was at this time that Muslims scarred the Temple Mount with their despicable Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque. And sixth, today, Damascus is the epicenter of world conflict. It began following America's ill-advised and counterproductive invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq. It is not only from Syria that the world's largest, most transformational and anti-Semitic migration has commenced. Europe with anti-Semitism. Damascus has divided the world into warring factions, with Sunni Islam, the United States, Europe, and the Kurds on one side, and Shia Islam, Russia, China, and Turkey on the other. Now, this is among the catalysts of World War III, along with the enduring hatred of Muslims for Jews. And now that Israel has become Donald Trump's lapdog. Oh, no, that's not fair. Footstool. And now that with Erdogan openly claiming death to Israel in the last month, and Donald Trump calling him his buddy, his good friend, and now working with Turkey to control and influence Syria, you can be assured that this prophecy will be fulfilled just as Isaiah was inspired by Yahweh to foretell. Damascus, therefore, appears in this pivotal text, delineating the end of man's religious ways and political ways. For all of these reasons, its fall is more than simply future history being reported for our edification. In other words, where it is mankind's poorest choices that have brought Damascus to center stage. The events being foretold also expose and condemn the religions, the political, and the militaristic influences that have precipitated the fall of man. It's all manifest in this horrible den of iniquity. Since information empowers understanding and full disclosure engenders trust, know that in another context, Sur, which was translated, is revolting and corrupt, and will be removed from inhabited cities, and Yashaya, Isaiah 17:1, could have been rendered as go, come, depart, or be dragged away. However, the realization that cities are immobile means that these connotations were not applicable. Further, as is typically the case, there were a considerable number of other primary, secondary, and tertiary definitions that were readily integrated into this opening statement, all of which apply to the situation and fate of Damascus. Sure, could also have been translated is degenerate and unrestrained. Boy, is that the truth. And thus shall be rejected and abolished as a population center. True that. Sure, speaks of a city which will be abandoned after enduring an onslaught of terrorism because the anguishing ass of a town is displeasing. Obviously, God doesn't have the same view of Al-Jolani that does POTUS. The phrase suggests that the degenerate city will be abolished and forsaken, ceasing to have any value for having been unrestrained under the terrorist control of the ultimate ass, Al-Jolani, and his Islamic State. If we were to isolate by itself, in addition to uninhabited city, village, or town, it also speaks of the displeasing nature of religious temples and shrines. Can address anguish, anxiety, wrath, anger, and alarming terror. More telling still, as a play on words, something Yah enjoys, and is a male donkey and a domestic ass, something that Yahweh attributes directly to Islam through Ishmael, where he said he will be a wild ass of a man. His brother's hand will be lifted against brother and brother against brother, and they will live in hostility against the whole world. This connotation draws our attention back to one of Yah's earliest prophecies. As a matter of fact, I have it here more accurately presented than my paraphrase. God specifically said of the progenitor of Islam, Ishmael, whom the Quran claims was the forefather of Islam, the one who is responsible for the promise of Islam. It says, God said this: he will be a wild ass of a man. His hand will be raised against his brothers, and his brothers' hands will be raised against him. And so he will live in hostility with the whole world. Bereshith, Genesis 16:12. Now, having migrated towards Damascus and having been claimed in the Quran and in the Hadith by Muhammad to be the forefather of Islam, this domesticated ass is a city-dwelling Muslim, the terrorist jihadist Al-Jolani in a suit. As further evidence, Islam, as the most overtly satanic religion ever foisted on the masses, is also the most degenerate and revolting faith to be considered a mainstream religion. It is a source of countless religious shrines, unrestrained anger, anguish, and alarming terror. It is responsible, in fact, for 99% of the terrorist attacks worldwide. It, of course, is responsible for what happened to Israel on October 7th. Now, this is particularly poignant today because, according to the United Nations and world leaders, it's okay for Muslims to perpetrate genocide against Jews, even to push them out of their homeland. But it's a war crime for Jews to defend themselves. Isolating and condemning Israel, as progressive and Muslims are doing with their immoral and false narratives, is going to result in war. And in Damascus, we have seen the coming together of the progressives in Europe, along with the Muslims throughout the Middle East, all embracing a former leader of the Islamic State. Also worth considering, it is the juxtaposition of Ma'i and Mafala in Yeshaya 17:1, which were rendered as a twisted and tangled heap. Mali, that which is distorted and crooked, perverted and contorted, from Awa, bent, twisted and invalid, of fallen buildings and rubble. Mafala, of destruction, which is lifeless and collapsed structures, from Nafal, fallen, prostrate, and being an inferior position as a result of an untimely birth. They also describe the nature of the Quran, which is a twisted and converted perversion of the truth. Allah's book is distorted, invalid, and ruinous. And of that, I am the foremost expert, so I am not saying anything which I cannot prove. The religious signature move, of course, is prostration. Its most notable result is destruction and depopulation. As for the untimely birth aspect of Mafala, which should have been aborted, we have to look further than Ishmael. He was the direct product of one man and one woman's ill-fated attempt to corrupt God's way by producing a twisted perversion of it. The untimely birth resulted in religion, particularly Islam. But this miscarriage is not limited to Muhammad's death cult, because in Galatians, Paul used a twisted and contorted perversion of Ishmael's birth, which, I should say, more of a, rather than a perversion, it was just an outlandish lie, to justify his new covenant. Moreover, let us never forget that it was on the road to Damascus where Shaul, known to Christians as Paul, encountered Satan and became demon-possessed. Ma'i and Mafala adroitly and collectively depict the result of Muhammad's abysmal aberrations, with Islamic terrorists running amok in Damascus. In their wake, they will leave a twisted, distorted, and corrupt, perverted place subject to prostration. It's what they've already done. The prophecy is fulfilled. As clearly as words allow, God's prophetic depiction describes exactly what we are witnessing throughout Iraq and Syria. Cities like Aleppo and Homs, Fallujah and Mosul have become twisted and tangled piles of fallen and deserted buildings. In time, Damascus will reflect the same, a contorted heap of collapsed structures. Now, if you have the stomach for such things, conduct an internet search under destroyed Syrian cities. Now, if you'd like to see the ongoing fulfillment of this prophecy, consider the Jobar neighborhood of Damascus. Its demise was presented in the Towards Data and Science article, which reads, 7 years of war have left entire Syrian cities in rubble. High-resolution satellite imagery was captured between September of 2013 and November of 2017 to reveal the condition of Aleppo, which is northwestern Syria, Damascus, which is southwestern Syria, Dara in southern Syria, Deir as-Zor, eastern Syria, Hama, western Syria, Homs, western Syria, between or just north of Damascus, Idlib, northwestern Syria, Raqqa, central Syria. They found 109,393 severely damaged structures, with 2/3 of those so severely damaged they should be considered completely destroyed. A fulfillment of the prophecy. In terms of the number of damaged structures, 33% were in Aleppo, 25% were in Damascus itself. That would mean over 25,000 would be in Damascus. 26,000, 27,000 actually to be exact. 27,000 destroyed buildings already in Damascus. Yes. In fact, the exact math is 27,741. Buildings have been rendered a twisted heap of rubble as of 2017, with 10,673 of those having collapsed in Damascus alone. And as of last year, not a single fallen structure in Damascus has been reconstructed. Whereas in every other city damaged by war, many hundreds have been rebuilt, but not in Damascus. Inexcusably, the jihadists, who are the impetus behind this destruction, are wielding American weapons, many brought to them through Turkey. Between prostrating themselves in prayer, they are shouting, Allahu Akbar. When time permits, they enslave young boys, gang rape little girls, and murder men and women en masse. It is unconscionable. And when you recognize that the arms and funds for al-Julani to orchestrate his terrorist coup over Syria came from Turkey, a NATO member with American weapons. And then Donald Trump, speaking of Erdogan in front of Netanyahu when he was in the White House, saying, oh, yeah, we have a great relationship, really good guy. This was the day after Erdogan said, death to Israel. And now America went on record yesterday of saying they're going to work with Turkey to influence Syria. Pretty obvious. God got it right. We have already witnessed this prophecy being fulfilled. Americans, all the while, are oblivious to the consequence of their nation's failures in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria, causing the death of millions of souls and the forced migration of many millions more, causing the transformation of places like Europe and Canada, Australia, where progressives have embraced Muslims because of their numbers and their attitude. Even worse, in the process, the United States is making Israel more vulnerable to the onslaught of Allah's caustic religion, with Donald Trump promising, $150 billion worth of America's most advanced weapons to the Islamic nations surrounding Israel. Syria is now a client of Turkey, having been a client of Iran. Even Gaza is influenced by them. Through Hezbollah, Allah's party, the religious regime in Iran, created a land crescent from Iran into through Syria into Lebanon and down into Israel, which has caused such havoc in Israel and armed Hezbollah in Lebanon to be so destructive to Israel, causing Israel to have to invade Lebanon. And while they were in Lebanon and they routed the leadership of Hezbollah, and while Syria was in chaos, the IDF bombed many areas around Damascus. Further affirming this prophecy. Shortly after the affirmation of a land for peace treaty, which will be forced on Israel in the next 12 months, between now and 22 May 2026. Muslims will quickly and callously disregard the promises that they have made regarding peace in the spirit of Hudabayah, which, if you don't know, you should read about in Goddamn Religion. And they will callously disregard those promises, and they will arm themselves so that they can invade Israel, not only from the north and from the east and from the south and from the west, but from the inside. And they will have been set up by America's constant interference and ultimately Donald Trump's willingness to sell Israel out to those who have invested so heavily in him in the Islamic world. Over the past decades, under Presidents Bush, Obama, Trump, Biden, the United States has fundamentally changed the balance of power in the region by providing Muslims with 25 times as much advanced weaponry as is offered to God's chosen people. The devil's regime will be wielding the best armaments money can buy. Even Iran was released from economic sanctions by the Biden administration and then protected as it's completed its nuclear program. And in the final throes of it, Donald Trump gave them a pass and kept Israel from destroying. All of this while the Ayatollah and company scream, "Death to America, death to Israel. Allahu Akbar." Signs are everywhere. Moving on to the second statement within this remarkable prophecy, we find yet another reference to Islam. Yahweh's use of Aror, translated as Aror, the repudiated outcasts, in Yashia 17:2, could well be an allusion to Lebanon, which has been bankrupt financially and morally by Allah's party. After Hezbollah has been destroyed in Syria by opposing jihadist Sunni Muslims, will attack Israel by marching through this once proud country, long time ago, known to the world for its soaring cypress trees. It will become a casualty of the Syrian war, yet another nation devastated and impoverished by Islam. Error may also depict the millions of Muslims bequeathed with the misnomer Palestinians. Palestinian and Palestine were conceived for a singular purpose, for the obliteration of Israel. It is a genocidal phrase. Those categorized under this political myth have become destitute and impoverished outcasts. And from Israel, they are now living in Jordan and in Lebanese refugee camps. Further, this Aurora was a town in Ammon, which is Jordan today, a nation where the largest segment of the population considers themselves to be Palestinians, which is a miracle in itself since the last Philistine became extinct 2,300 years ago. But that's Islam's greatest miracle, the reincarnation of an extinct people. The realization that Aurora is related to our roots, meaning dreadful and horrible wadi, encourages us to consider Petra, that was originally the site of the Kaaba, the actual and mythical birthplace of Islam. If you were to consider Mecca, it's mythical and Petra would be actual. And this, of course, is Israel's most ardent foe. During Muhammad's life, Mecca simply didn't exist, but Petra was known as the watering hole for passing caravans. Similarly, Aret speaks of ruthless acts of terrorism, something Muhammad practiced with reckless abandon. Envisioning the future by observing the past, a road which the theological word book of the Old Testament affirms is the root of Aurora, is used to depict another wild ass, this time in Job 39:5. This is reminding us that Ishmael's descendants, today's Muslims, remain wild asses of men. Aurora is one of many Hebrew words with a number of shades. On this occasion, it was chosen to draw our attention to the fate of the mythical Palestinians who consider themselves outcasts, while also directing our attention to Lebanon and Jordan, the nations in which these destitute people have been impoverished and repudiated. In its many facets, we see additional tie-ins because they are wild asses of men, and this time from the Wadi of Petra, whereby repeatedly making connections to Islam, we also find Ishmael and that connection. Just as Eliezer of Damascus and Ishmael, Hagar's son, were rejected and expressly excluded from the covenant, Yahweh remains consistent. Abandoned and forsaken, Azab, rejected, deserted, estranged, and left behind, separated, destroyed, and damned, are the inhabited and terrorized regions, the populated and anguished cities filled with the displeasing nature of religious temples and shrines, as well as the wrathful donkeys of Aurora, the repudiated outcasts. The exiles, a reference to the Palestinian refugees of the Arnon Valley in Ammon, Jordan. The renounced and destitute who are laid bare, of those stripped of all pretense. Won't that be a pleasant change? Of the impoverished and vulnerable, of those without resources who are wild asses, a reference to Islam through Ishmael, from Arar, to be stripped of all pretense and laid utterly bare. For there will be Lahaya, because of this, it will exist. That there will be roaming animals fighting in militant militias along with their helpers. Unified jihadists gathered under their helpers. Helpers is a reference to the Muslim Ansar helpers who fought, plundered, and terrorized alongside of Muhammad, and who comprise the ranks of the Islamic terrorist organizations today. All who fight in herds, acting like sheep, goats, and camels or donkeys, abandoned as a group because they will have collectively missed the way, and they will fail miserably. But they will cease and they will prostrate themselves because there will be no one left to terrorize. I've long said that Muslims kill more Muslims than they do Jews or infidels, and the reason is that they're just mean and deadly, and there are more Muslims in their proximity than there are Jews and infidels. And when Muslims overhunted Jews, they turned on themselves. I mean, the first large war in Islam was the War of Compulsion, where all Arabs were forced into Islam. And so it has long been the case that Muslims have warred with one another. And you look at Syria, it is the poster child for Muslims warring against Muslims. It must have had 15 to 20 different Islamic terrorist organizations all vying for control. And so it is a place where Muslim was fighting Muslim. The demise of Damascus and Syria in conjunction with it will lead directly to the obliteration of neighboring Jordan. The refugees living there, masquerading as Palestinians, living as Muslims in general, will suffer a debilitating and self-inflicting wound. The text presents a picture of marauding bands of mujahideen, acting like the savage animals their religion has bred them to become. And they will kill until there's no one left to terrorize. And the fact is, at least according to Muhammad and his Quran, all good Muslims are terrorists. The 8th surah says that there are only two types of Muslims: those who have died following their oath to kill, and those who are waiting to die while killing for Allah. And Muslims will kill. Should anyone be reluctant to embrace the conclusion that this mayhem is being perpetrated by Muslims, please consider the setting and the circumstances, or at the very least, consider what happened on October 7th, 2023. As the most overtly adversarial and deeply religious of deadly religions, with Allah molded after Satan, with their telling taunt being Allahu Akbar, Allah is greater, Muslims are universally azab, forsaken, damned, with no hope of redemption or reprieve from Yahowah. Muslims not only comprise the overwhelming preponderance of the population of the Arnon Valley and present-day Jordan, but these interlopers are also the most infamous Aurora, repudiated outcasts, and alleged exiles the world has ever known. They are the destitute and impoverished, with many acting, of course, like asses. Open any newspaper and you will likely see, well, forget about the newspaper. Go to X or Facebook or YouTube, and you will likely be confronted with the names of Islamic terrorist groups that incorporate the Ansar in this title. Without Allah's little helpers, the Ansar, Muhammad's Islam would have died in Yathrib because there would not have been a sufficient number of jihadists, and therefore not any successful terrorist raids. And without the booty derived from jihad, Islam is as hollow as the mafia without money. Now, while that is more than sufficient to prove this point, we must also learn that these mujahideen will do as Muslims have done throughout the long history of this horrific religion. They will bow down in the midst of their killing spree and pay tribute to their bloodthirsty God. Even more telling, they will rabats, crouch down and stretch out in prostration, the signature rite of the Islamic religion. And after, there is on Charad, no one left to terrorize, they will rabats, stop, to bow down again and prostrate themselves in prayer. Further, there is a direct and irrefutable connection between Islam and terrorism, one only the most ignorant, irrational, religious, or politically correct progressive would deny. Muslims comprise 20% of the world's population, and they commit 99% of all terrorist acts, especially against Jews and in Israel. Right from the beginning, some 1,400 years ago, once the first Muslims robbed, raped, and murdered almost every Jew within reach, they turned on their fellow Muslims. And even to this day, Muslims murder 10 times more Muslims than they do infidels. By simply accepting the obvious and irrefutable reality, one reinforced throughout the 5 volumes of Goddamn Religion, we find future history unfolding before our eyes. We are being provided a prophetic look at the rise and fall of Islam while examining its nature and consequence through God's prophetic testimony. But beyond the advantage of knowing how the world will devolve over the next 9 years, by describing Islam in this way, by revealing that these religious exiles will impoverish lives in Jordan and then turn on one another using terror to obliterate the population, stopping to bow down in prayer after they annihilate their own, Yahweh has once again provided reasons for us to forgo and disdain faith. By focusing on the introductory phrase, azab, arorar, disassociate from these wild asses masquerading as exiles and as helpers, the observant may come to appreciate the strategy that I have endorsed for a long time, as long as I can remember. Muslims need to be left alone. They ought not be provoked through invasions. They should be isolated and quarantined as one would treat any deadly pandemic, rather than be allowed to migrate. And they ought to be left to their own devices, to stones, swords, and impoverished explosive devices, rather than be equipped with advanced weaponry or nuclear technology. We must stop apologizing for Muslims, stop protecting Islamists, stop enriching jihadists, stop arming them. We're just getting worse at it. Stop incorporating them into Western society. We're getting worse at that too. Should we isolate them instead, the preponderance of terrorism would be constrained within Islamic nations. That is the best we can do, because as this prophecy foretells, they will continue to kill, and they will kill one another. Now, if this sounds harsh, then I would ask you to consider the lives of the innocent victims that would be spared. Compassion and good judgment necessitate opposing deadly and destructive behavior, particularly when it is inspired by a religion. What we have witnessed in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Somalia, Sudan, Egypt, Lebanon, Turkey, Libya, Nigeria, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Gaza, and under the Palestinian Authority over the past decade serves as a prelude to God's warning. There is no good side in this conflict, only various grades of depravity. Muslims have been conditioned by the Quran to kill. They kill following Muhammad's example and Allah's orders. While the Quran dictates that their preferred prey be Jews, then Christians, followed by secularists, killing peaceful Muslims is also vogue in the Quran. This fixation on killing dominates the final surahs chronologically in Islam. Muhammad and his wannabe God began terrorizing Arabs, followed by monotheistic Jews, Byzantine Christians, and finally peaceful Muslims for their breach of the Islamic faith. God continues. So the fortified city, the defensive structures, will cease to exist, coming to an end as a result of the choices of the inhabitants on account of Ephraim. Ephraim is typically used as a metaphor for a divided Yisrael, along with the government out of Damascus. Wow. Including the remnant of Aram, Syria, vehement and burdensome, similarly fanatical and onerous. abundantly wealthy and overtly glorified. The children of Israel will actually continue to exist. Prophetically declares Yahweh, the vast array of spiritual messengers and envoys. Yashayah, deliverance is from Yahweh, Isaiah 17:3. Wow, so we are told here that the reason that much of this is going to happen in Syria will be the result of Ephraim, which is a divided Israel. And that's what we're witnessing today. Israel is a house at war with itself. You have 20 to 25% of the progressives trying to bring down the government and trying to capitulate to the Islamic terrorists that want to destroy Israel. You have 20 to 25% of the population between the Haredim and ultra-Orthodox Jews that are sucking Israel dry. There are parasites, and they are literally damning Israel's relationship with Yahweh. And then you have the diaspora Jews, that the majority of which are disowning Israel, actually calling for Israel's demise. And the current government stays in power because it appeases a very right-wing contingency that thinks that war at all costs is the only salvation for Israel, that the IDF can bomb Israel into continued existence. It's one of the things that I keep on posting about, is that all that has happened with all of the bombing all around Israel by the IDF is increased rage around the world. There are no fewer jihadists. And this next war against Israel is going to be largely fought by jihadists, not a war that's going to be fought in fancy fighter aircraft or by tanks, but in fact, like the previous assault of 10/7, which the IDF is ill-equipped to defend, as has been proven. And so the IDF, just to show that it's got muscle and verve, is bombing all around. And they are indeed bombing in and around Damascus. And now that the United States is abandoning Israel and that and embracing Turkey, and Turkey has embraced the Islamic State's takeover of Syria and is trying to focus Syria's jihadist against Israel to destroy Israel, according to Erdogan's own words. Israel will try to use what it has to defend itself as it thinks it must, which means it's going to be using its fighter aircraft and bombs to pound Damascus and the government in Damascus, and the war machine being marshaled there, which is very close to its own border. And of course, everything Israel has done thus far has made a bad situation worse, so it's going to turn the world more and more against Israel. But this is certainly how this reads, that it is a divided Israel that lights this spark, that ignites this cauldron, that ultimately comes to bear on God's people. It is on account of Ephraim. Now, you can read that two ways. You can say that the jihadists and the Islamic State, backed by NATO, Turkey, and the United States, with weapons being supplied from around the world, are going to attack Israel because Israel is divided. And that even can be rendered two ways. Israel is divided because you have the progressives and the Haredim at war with each other in Israel, and you have the diaspora Jews and the Israeli Jews at odds with one another. And because of this weakness and this divisiveness, they see it as the perfect time to invade Israel. The second is that Israel is going to be severed with a two-state dissolution forced on the country over the next year, and that is going to divide Israel right through its core, where 70% of its people live. And because of this version of a divided Israel, the Muslims will be inspired to attack. And the third way to interpret this is that the IDF continues to pound away and involve itself in Syria, and so that Turkey and the United States and the whole European Union, which is supporting the Islamic State's capture of Syria and arming it and sending money and providing its support while condemning Israel, while the world arms the Syrian jihadists to invade Israel because Israel is being set apart, cast away, abandoned by the rest of the world. Now, of those four possibilities, my sense is that all four are true. And of course, as it relates to the government of Syria falling, it happened, didn't it? Prophecy has been fulfilled. And we now know that those who have taken over Syria are as vehement, fanatical, onerous as was the regime that was disposed. When it comes to prophecy, God's really good at it. The children of Israel, we read, will actually continue to exist, however. And this is the good news and the bad news. This report that everything we're reading is the prelude to the time of Israel's troubles that begins on Shabuah, which means 7 years prior to the Messiah's return with Yahowah in 2033. And on Shabuah, which is the next harvest, which is the Shabat of May 22nd, 2026. And it's going to look exceedingly dim for Israel. If you look at what we see in Israel right now, with the world erupting against Israel and with nations poised to meet here in 2 weeks to dictate the fate of Israel at the United Nations, where Israel is likely to have no support from any major nation, including the United States, and will be undermined by the United States, every Islamic country, every country in the EU, perhaps save one, but China, Russia, the United States, the UK, Spain, France, Canada, all are going to betray God's people. And it's going to look like there's no hope. And then Muslims are going to invade in greater force than ever before, at least 100 times and perhaps 1,000 times 10-7. And it's going to be extremely difficult for Israel, even this perception of survival. But God is clear. Israel will survive. There will be a remnant. That is the primary purpose of the two witnesses, is to ensure that there's going to be a remnant. Our entire mission is to support Israel against its enemies, to ensure that there is a remnant. And it's not just a remnant, it's a receptive remnant. It's a remnant that comes to appreciate Yahweh's name again, that comes to recognize what Dod, as the Son of God, did on behalf of God's people by fulfilling Pesach, Matzah, and Bakurim. It's a remnant that celebrates the Mikre as they were intended, who engages in the covenant as it was designed by God. And so Israel will survive. So says Yahowah. Now, some of these words have diverse connotations. For example, kabud can be positive or negative depending on the context. In this case, since Yahweh is speaking about the utter destruction of Damascus and the implications associated with the demise of the Syrian government, we'd be wise to apply the darker shadings of kabod. Rather than rendering it as significant and glorious, a more fitting depiction can be advanced by examining the etymological roots, which are kabad and kobed. They suggest that the Islamic nations surrounding Israel will cease to exist upon the Messiah's return, because Muslims are, well, vehement in their rage, onerous and burdensome in their abuse, hard-headed and glorious in their own thinking, but ignorant and dim-witted all at all the same, and particularly their beliefs, which are foolish, and thus they must be considered as enraged and troublesome, which is an apt depiction of Allahu Akbar screaming Islamic jihadists, particularly those that film themselves on their GoPros as they infested Israel, raping, torturing, plundering, abducting, and killing. Those who have been indoctrinated by Muhammad's religion and who seek the destruction of Israel will be destroyed so that Israel might endure. As the author of these 5 books called Goddamn Religion and over 4,000 pages and in support of evidence and reason marshaled against the Islamic texts, I can attest that Islam is the most destructive, deadly, and demonic religion ever conceived. It indeed preys on the dim-witted, turning them into savages. While being stupid is not a crime, far too many Muslims are sadistic, sexually abusive, and ruthless, following Muhammad's example. And since they are arrogant, immoral, and irrational, there is no point in attempting to negotiate or reason with them. These traits make Muslims the ultimate scourge on humankind. And while that was not known 2,700 years ago to anyone other than Yahweh and his prophet, this being Yahshua Isaiah, since it is now obvious and this prophecy is now inevitable, let's offer credit to where credit is due. Yahweh and Yahshua warned the world about Islam 20 centuries before the religion existed, with a complete copy of this scroll dated 900 years before the religion's initial attempt at genocide against Jews. Damascus, which is Damascus, has been at the center of Islam's show of intolerance. Here, Sunni jihadists armed with American weapons have murdered, raped, abducted, tortured, and plundered tens of thousands of Shiites and Christians while opposing Shia troops and militias, and they have responded in kind, albeit with Russian and Iranian arms. We have witnessed this current uprising in our newspapers and our presence, but Yahweh foretold it 2,700 years ago. Yahweh told Yahshua that Islamic infighting will reduce Damascus to rubble. The city's name describes a weeping sore where there are tears of sorrow over corpses covered in dung, a place where people are ultimately silenced. We've been told how the Syrian war will unfold and conclude. And we already know that the cost in human lives will be horrific, commiserate with the consequence of spreading this plague worldwide, with the unprecedented migration of Muslims out of Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Lebanon into Europe and to the Americas. The legacy cost of America's ill-fated invasion into Iraq continues to be incalculable and unconscionable. With an eye to history, we should recognize and be cognizant of the fact that Damascus served as the capital of the most enduring, imposing, and violent Islamic caliphate. While they plundered, the known world, killing, raping, torturing, enslaving 200 million people, a third of the Earth's population at the time. And of all places, it is Damascus, which also gave birth to Christianity. It was in Damascus that Paul was inspired to slander Yahweh and renounce his Torah, after having been blinded and crippled by Satan on his way into town. In this light, Darban, as a prod and goad, serves as an indictment of Paul's credibility, because he co-opted the term from Dionysus and from Bacchus in an attempt to establish his credibility with Greeks and Romans by pretending that his wannabe god told him it's difficult to kick against the goad, a line from Dionysus. Even in the words which comprise Damascus, they're telling, depicting the city as Dama, a weeping sore where Dima, tears of sorrow, are shed because Domen corpses are covered with dung, as the voices of the victims Daman are silenced. These connotations address the very conditions we have witnessed in Syria and are continuing to witness as Jolani's thugs murder Alawites and Christians, and soon they will turn on the Druze, the Kurds, and then on the Jews. What we're witnessing is Daron, contemptible and abhorrent, and it is Islam. Ephraim, of course, addresses a divided Israel. The region was initially estranged because they forgot the covenant, favoring the kind of international military alliances that have been so historically devastating for Israel and for the world. The northern kingdom was destroyed by Assyria within a generation of its formation. Now, as the clock ticks towards the mid to late 2020s, it is Assyria's turn to suffer. Iran will ultimately lose the war. It has had its proxies fight thus far. While their demise will spare Ephraim from total obliteration, the region of Israel, once known as the Northern Kingdom, will suffer serious blows at the hands of the jihadists who will attack Israel after ransacking Syria. And this is to suggest that the IDF will bomb Damascus back into the Stone Age, hoping they can prolong Israel's survival. However, since Yahweh has promised to reconcile his relationship with Israel by 2033, Ephraim will be reunited with Yehudah. This will make Israel equivalent to Jacob once again, especially when seen from the perspective of the covenant family. Unfortunately, most Israelites will not survive to enjoy this day. Within the next 8.5 years, a remnant of the 10 tribes of Israel, comprising particularly Ephraim, which were once scattered in Assyria, today's Iran, Iraq, and Syria, will end their rebellion with Yahweh. The long divorce will be over that was proclaimed in Hosea, at least for a responsive few within the ethnic Israelite population. A day of reconciliation, Yom Kippurim, and year 6000 Yah looms, and it is imminent. October 2nd, sunset in Jerusalem, 2033. In Yeshaya 17:3, Amon, Haram, could have been translated as narrowly as Syria, so long as we are cognizant that it once covered a much larger area. And the name means more to the Islamic combatants fighting there than any current national border. After all, the capital of the Islamic world. After Sunnis bludgeoned the Shia Muslims into submission in the 8th century was Damascus, and their Sham, Syria, composed the entire region, including today's Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, Iran, and Iraq. It was from Damascus that the Islamic Caliphate ruled, swords raised over much of the world, from Spain and Morocco to Persia and India, and everything in between. The very Sunni jihadists bludgeoning Syria as the Islamic State, IS, sometimes called ISIS, but always the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, what its name means, are committed to the same result. Their intent is for the world to surrender to Allah, beginning in Israel. Their goal remains the catalyst for Islamic conquest, the throttle for Islamic rage, the sandbox for jihadists to prove themselves worthy of paradise, and the fulcrum upon which Sunni and Shia Islam will fight together and then turn on each other. This is the fuse of the next world war, with alliances divided between the belligerents. Every Muslim within Greater Assyria will suffer, and deservedly so, because they are, to one degree or another, fanatical and onerous, ignorant and enraged. And they will die while extinguishing the lives of others in true Islamic fashion, consistent with the 8th Surah. And as a result, Yisrael will live. Well, that and more. It is ironic that Islamic fixation on dying, killing everyone in the name of their God, will actually serve to spare Israel. As walking bombs with human shields, jihadists will kill more Muslims than Jews. It is what we have witnessed in Gaza. Now, before we press on, let's clear up a potential misconception. Some may assume that Yahweh is encouraging these religious zealots to harm themselves for the sake of his children, but that is not the case. At this point, with Muslims killing Muslims, Yahweh is simply reporting what he has witnessed in our future. That is not to say that God will not intervene. He will, but only when the survival of Israel is at stake, only when a remnant of Israel returns to him will he return to them. But in the meantime, the IDF will do its best to protect Israel, and that may mean leveling much of Damascus, and so they will. Now, realizing that Yahweh uses prophecy to prove that he exists and that he inspired this testimony, we have been given a remarkable affirmation. And this is just the introduction to one of the most revealing, maybe the single most revealing prophecies of our time. This prophetic portrayal specifically states that the government of Damascus, including the remnant of Syria, will fall. Now, that is precisely what's happened. I think this is a good place for us to pause. We will pick up this story because it's about to get exceedingly specific relative to the imposition of the two-state solution on Israel, which is the Islamic version of the final solution, because Muslims do not want two states. They want Islam to rule the world. And the temporary imposition of a state of Islamic terrorism makes that far more easily achieved. I thank you for listening. This has been a special edition of the YAHOWAH blog and the gateway to Israel's demise by returning to the Holocaust.